15. They walked all the way down the sidewalk, and I'm just there just begging God, please, Lord, cut my arm off, anything but this. You know, I'm out there begging and pleading. They walked all the way down, and he spoke to me one last time. This is what he said: you're going to miss me again. And when he spoke that to my spirit, I said, oh, no, I ain't either. I took off running out that restaurant, through those doors, right out in the middle of Main Street, and screamed to the top of my lungs, hey, y'all, wait just a second. That man stopped like he'd been shot at. He turned around, he looked at me. Y'all think I'm joking. I promise you this out there. That man stopped, he turned around, he gave me one of those, you know, looks like, oh, God, please tell me he's not talking to me, Jesus. You know, and he pointed at himself. I said, yeah, y'all. I said, I need you to come back here for a minute. He said, oh, no, we got to go. I said, no, man, seriously, I need to talk to you, man. He said, oh, man, we would, but we got to go. And I saw he wasn't going to turn around, so I took off jogging up Main Street after this guy. I thought, I'm not missing God twice. I missed him once. I've been miserable. This guy's going to eat today if I have to put it in his mouth. I saw him running up the street. He turned around. He saw he wasn't getting away. He started tugging his wife behind me. You know, and he came down. And they wouldn't even come all the way to me, brother. They came from like me to you away from me. He stopped me. He said, can we help you? I said, man, y'all don't think I'm crazy? Because I think I'm crazy. I said, but I'm young. And I'm just getting acclimated to this Jesus stuff. And I don't know a whole lot about being a Christian. But I believe God can speak to people. And I said, y'all walked over a couple hours ago and God spoke to me and he told me to feed y'all. And I didn't listen. And I said, God has been whipping my tail ever since. So I've got to get y'all something to eat. And he looked back at me and he said, oh, no, son, we really appreciate that. I said, no, man, really, I've got to do this, sir. He said, no, really, you don't. I said, no, really, I've got to do this. He said, really, we appreciate it. I said, sir, please, would you just come in and get some? No, really, I said, sir, I said, let me just tell you how this is going to happen. I don't mean to offend you, but I'm buying you something to eat. And I said, if y'all don't come in, I'm following you home. We'll see where you live, and I'm going to set it on your doorstep when I get off work. Because one way or another, I ain't missing God twice. And he looked at me, and he tugged his wife, and he said, come on, honey, let's go in. So they went in, and they sat down. They were absolutely petrified. You could tell by the look on their face. They were terrified. And he came and he sat down. I brought the menus. They ordered, they ate. When they got done, I brought the dessert menus back. I made them people eat cheesecake. I was not going to do it halfway. I brought it back. They ordered. They ate dessert. They got finished with dessert. And I came back by after they finished, and I got the plates. And I said, sir, is there anything else you guys need? And he turned around and he shook my hand. He said, son, I said, I really appreciate this. I said, man, I said, that's no problem. I said, I just really felt in my heart God wanted me to do this. And I walked over to her and I said, is there anything you need? And she reached up and she grabbed a hold of my wrist. And I'll never forget this as long as I live, 14 years ago. She reached up, she grabbed a hold of my wrist. She said, son, you will never know what this means to me. And I said, ma'am, I said, I hope I did not offend you all, and I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I said, but God told me to do that. I know he did. I said, I've never had God speak to me like this. She said, son, I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm not eating in a week. And she had tears running down her face. And she began to tell me their story. She said, we were evicted from our apartment yesterday. And she said, they told us we had 24 hours to move out because they found out that we had been over a week, all of our utilities shut off. She said, my husband lost his job. He's not been able to find work. She said, we have lost everything we have. And if you ever go to a place called Whitley City, Kentucky, on Highway 27, right beside the Kroger, there's a stone bridge overpass. And that's where they were moving their things. They were moving under the bridge. And that's where they were walking to when I saw them. And so she began to tell me this story. And she said, son, she said, I was raised in church. She said, I believed in God my whole life. She said, I was baptized when I was a little girl. And she said, but the last several months, she said, I have prayed, I have cried, I've pleaded with God. And she said, we've went months. She said, we've not heard a thing. God's not spoke. God's not made a way. And she said, I told my husband yesterday, you know, I don't even think there is a God anymore. And she said, and if there is one, he hates us because he won't answer. And she said, I woke up this morning, didn't say anything to my husband. Nobody else knows. And she said, but I whispered a prayer and I said, Jesus, if you're really real, show me. And if I don't hear from you today, then I'll know you're not interested in me and I'll never bother you again. And she said, here I am walking down the sidewalk and some crazy white kid runs out in the middle of Main Street screaming like a madman saying God told him to feed us. She said, I knew he heard my prayer. And right there at this little corner cafe at that table, I had an opportunity 14 years ago to lead that man and woman to Jesus in a prayer. And I say that to say this, not to brag or anything like that, because this one, I was this close to missing God twice. Yes. Not once, twice. Because God was speaking, Pastor, but it was something out of my comfort zone. And I didn't want to do it. But looking back, I asked myself, how many times was I obedient to God? And God opened doors for me, brother, that I didn't deserve. But then I look back and I ask myself, how many times was God trying to get me to do something? And I was so determined my way was better, and I might have missed him and missed my blessing. Because disobedience ties his hands. Discontentment ties his hands. You know, sometimes if we're not careful, we can just come across spiritually as ungrateful. Because we can ask God to do something for 3 months, and then after he does it, 2 days later, we done forgot about it. You know? And discontentment can tie his hands. Disobedience, disbelief, distraction. And I'll say this and I'll close. Because I believe that this one may possibly be the biggest issue that we as the church can face. And that's something that, like a cancer, it is infecting God's people everywhere. And that's discouragement. Because it's so easy, church, it's so easy. And I just want to be completely real for the next few minutes. It's so easy to get consumed with all the junk we got going on today. We have never seen a day. We're fighting the same devil that's always been fought. But he is fighting us in so many new ways today. Because when I was a child, you didn't hear of things like 1 out of every 2 people diagnosed with cancer. You didn't hear stuff like that. You didn't have all the stuff that's bombarding us on every corner now. You know, diabetes, it was nothing then like what it is now. And there's so many things, the economy and everything. It's so easy for the people of God sometimes to get discouraged by everything we face outside of these 4 walls. You know, and when I was a kid, I went through something. I never realized all the foolish things I did when I was a kid until I started praying about this message. When I was 13 years old, my mom and dad never would let me out the house a whole lot. My mom said I was embarrassing because she never knew what I'd say, which is true, because even today, most of the time, I don't know what I'm going to say until I say it. And when I was 13 years old, I never got to do a lot of stuff that some kids get to do. When I was a kid, one of the biggest things I'd ever done was a carnival. Anybody ever been to a carnival before? Anybody know what I'm talking about? When I was a kid, I thought they were amazing. Today, you could not give me $1 million to get on one of them things, because I didn't know back then they put them together in 6 hours and they got bolts left over. When I was a kid, that was amazing. I'd go and I just had the time of my life at those carnivals. But when I was 13 years old, I had a chance to go on a school trip to Six Flags over Georgia down in Atlanta. And when I went on that school trip, there's about 25 or 30 of us, and I went on this school trip, I was absolutely amazed, sister, when I looked at all those big roller coasters and all this stuff, and I was in awe at 13 years old. I was looking around, we were walking down that little walkway, we're looking at all the rides, we're riding the rides, and we walked by something, I'd never seen one. It was a rock climbing wall. Anybody ever seen a rock climbing wall, know what one is? I grew up in Kentucky, I'd seen a rock and a wall, but I never knew you could put the two together. But a rock climbing wall is this big disfigured wall with little pegs all over it, and you climb it, And so we walked by and I stopped. There was 3 guys, brother, were going up that wall. And I stopped and I'm looking at it. And I had 4 or 5 of my buddies with me, Pastor. And we had 3 or 4 girls with us. And I was crushing on one of them girls. Because when you're 13, that's all you think about, right? And I'm 13 years old. And I'm walking with my friends and these girls. And I look at that wall. And that little girl I was crushing on, she looked at me and she said, "James, can you climb that wall?" And I said, "Can I climb that wall?" Girl, you better believe you didn't know I was Spider-Man. I could climb that wall. And I saw, and I stuck my chest out. She looked at me and she said, "Prove it." I said, "Stupid girl." Stuck my mouth. Well, now I had to climb it. And I didn't know if I could or not. So I walked over to it and it had 3 lanes. It had beginner, intermediate, expert. Well, I knew I wasn't an expert. I'd never done it. I played sports my whole life. I thought I could do intermediate. But just so I didn't look silly, I got the beginner line. And when, we walked down and you go through the line, and when I finally got up, what it was is they lined all 3 of you up. They'd put this harness and this bungee cord on you, and then they'd go down, and then all 3 of you hooked up, they'd blow a whistle, and you'd all 3 climb the wall. So he comes in, and when I was a kid, they didn't have a lot of this stuff they got now. ADD, ADHD, all these diagnoses, and I'm not discrediting them because I believe they're legitimate. And if they had that when I was a kid, I would have been ADHD. I would have. I'm ADD now because I'm not as hyper as I used to be. But back then I've been ADHD because I couldn't focus. I couldn't pay attention real well. I'd wonder. But when I was a kid, they had a one-size-fits-all solution. And that was, if you didn't pay attention, Daddy pull his belt off, strap you across the backside, and you got to refocus really quickly. But when I was a kid, I could not pay attention real well. So the guy comes up and he puts his harness on me and he's putting the bungee on me and he's explaining to me what I need to do to climb the wall, but I'm not paying attention. And so while he's talking, I'm looking at those girls and I'm looking at my friends and butterflies and cotton candies and it's sunny and and I'm paying attention to all this other stuff, not hearing a word this guy's saying. After about 2 minutes, he looked at me and he said, "Did you get all that?" I said, "Mm-hmm." He goes on down, he straps up the next guy, then the third guy, and I'm sitting there waiting on him to blow the whistle, and I'm watching them girls, and I'm looking at my friends. That guy blows that whistle, and man, I take off up that wall like a torpedo. I'm about 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet up. I'm about a third of the way up the wall, and I look down, and I see those other two guys are way down there, and I begin to think to myself, in my 13-year-old mind, I got this. I can do this. Man, I'm impressed in her now. You know what it was when you was 13 years old. And I looked over and I was watching her and she's giggling and I'm back, I'm looking at my friends and thinking how jealous they must be because I'm showing off in front of these girls and they ain't, And I'm looking at those other two guys. The whole time I start looking around, I keep climbing that wall. Well, finally I got to a place where I was stuck because I couldn't reach the next peg. And I could not figure it out. I thought, why in the world would they build a wall where you can't climb? Because when I was in 8th grade, I was about 6'2", I was a lanky fella. And I'm tiptoeing and I'm swinging and everything. I cannot reach that next peg. And so I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to do? And while I'm sitting there, sister, all of a sudden I start to feel something on the bottom of my foot. And I look down and there's one of those guys that's underneath my left foot. And he said, "Hey, you're standing on my peg." I said, "No, I'm not, smart aleck. You're in my lane. What are you doing over here?" He said, "I'm not in your line. You're in my line." So I leaned back and I looked, and somewhere halfway up that wall, I left my beginner lane, went across the intermediate, and I'm hanging like a big old bug in between intermediate and expert, and the line's going right down the middle of me. And I thought, how in the world did I get here? And I look over, and this other guy's almost to my foot, and I thought, oh man, I got to do something. And I can't go back, I can't go down because these guys are right on my heels, and I can't reach the next peg, and I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm panicking, I'm thinking, James, don't make yourself look silly, this girl's watching. And so I think to myself, self, there's only one choice you got. You're going to have to jump like Michael Jordan and grab a hold of that peg and pull yourself up. Only option I had. So I started thinking, and I'm just, at that time I didn't even know God, that there was a God, but if there was one, I was praying to him. I was like, oh, please, 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 let me get this peg. I jumped as hard as I could, and I reached for that peg, and I went, missed it by a country mile. I swung out over the top, brother, of that crowd, and smacked right back into that wall like a bug would hit your windshield at 50 miles an hour. I hit it so hard, I bounced off of the wall. And I'm sitting there dangling on this bungee cord out in front of hundreds of people. And I'm thinking to myself, I look like the biggest idiot in Atlanta. And I'm dangling, and I go to reach a hold of those pegs and start trying it again. That guy starts lowering me down. I said, give me just a second. I think I can do this. He said, shut up, kid, and let go. So I let go, and he's bouncing me down like a spider on a string on this bungee cord. And I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, this is not happening. This is not happening. And he lets me down. And that guy, he wouldn't even let me, he knew I was embarrassed. He wouldn't even take the stuff off me. He made me stand there and watch them other two jokers climb all the way up and lower them down and unhook them first. And I'm sitting there just humiliated. And I won't even look up. I'm just sitting there thinking, God, please tell me this is a dream and I can pinch myself and wake up. And finally he comes down and my friends are laughing and them girls are laughing and I'm so embarrassed. And the guy comes down and he starts helping me take the bungee cord off. And I looked up with humiliation and I said, man, I don't know what happened. He said, son, I've been working here a long time. He said, I know exactly what happened. He said, you want me to tell you what your problem is? I said, yeah. I said, what did I do wrong? He said, you were fine as long as you kept your eyes up on where you were going. But as soon as you started looking at what everybody else was doing and everybody else was saying and everything else going on, he said they fall every time. And I thought back on that story and I thought maybe that's what David meant when he said, I look to the hills. Because he knew if I keep my eyes on everything else going on, it's so easy to be discouraged. When you hear the reports, and sometimes, and it's not that you're jealous, but sometimes it seems like you're watching other people get their prayers answered, and you feel like yours ain't getting past the ceiling of the church, and you get discouraged, and it weighs you down, so that you come to church on Sunday morning, and you love God, and you know that He's able, but you've gotten to the point where you're not really expecting Him to do it anymore, so that you're not disappointed. And discouragement ties His hands, because all the while, God is working behind the scenes at what we can't see and what we can't